Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 1, Chapter 36. Ahsoka and Kawani both eased back on their respective throttles upon reaching the fortress, maintaining vigilance but struck by the overwhelming destruction the Mantis had become. A conflagration of twisted, burning metal belched enormous pyroclastic plumes of smoke high into the air, dwarfing the monumental of once polished black stone that marked its base. A large metal slab with a forked end lay inward to the fortress, blown from its mechanisms from the eruptive devastation the ship had become. Several substantial portions of the walls relying upon one another, large cracks threatening to add more to the piles, could be heard splintering with thunderous cracks and bangs, adding their reports to the cacophonous maelstrom of sound. I wish I could have seen it, Kawani shouted over the clamor, staring up at the column of smoke and watching the light of the inferno dance across the uncharted surfaces of Vader's stronghold. Ahsoka only shook her head, knowing that Kawani would have enjoyed it, but feeling detached from her immediate reality. Emotion took hold unexpectedly, prompting an inner dialogue she had been avoiding. The actuality of her presence here, at this doorstep, was beginning to influence her thoughts and feelings, creating a whirlwind of confusion and disorder. She had thought herself rid of the emotional ties between herself and her former master, but would they really ever dissipate? Should they? She knew the answers to both questions were rhetorical, but they did not allow for the sudden disorderliness that side of her had become. Whatever answers be held, the truth was on the structure's inside, not out here. We need a way in, Ani, Ahsoka said, placing a hand on the side of her head to wrap the cloth tightly around what remained of her mantra. Kawani heard the statement and stared blankly at the vaulted doorway that was now gateless, permitting what she thought was an obvious answer to Ahsoka's question. Raising a hand to point out as much, I don't think we need to overcomplicate this, she said, swinging her leg over to dismount the bike. That's, Ahsoka began, dismounting her bike after coming to a complete stop. Not what I meant. She finished, adding her voice to the sound deluge and walked ahead of the bike a few meters. The heat was intense on her face and arms as she raised a hand and began drawing upon the force. Kawani stared on, the moment dripping with anticipation as she saw the magnitude of what Ahsoka was drawing into herself. She felt it as she stumbled forward a few steps. The conflagration before them was already creating a draft to feed itself, but it was intensifying substantially with Ahsoka at its focal point. She was becoming a fulcrum of force energy, and with it, the natural energies of the planet itself. What was a strong breeze as the fire consumed its fuel was now a storm, seeping the flames out of their very existence and reversing the course of the vertical cloud of smoke. Ahsoka invited all the forms the Force would allow into her. Dark side, light side, it didn't matter. There was only the Force she knew. Focusing on the ship's wreckage, she closed her eyes to concentrate fully on the breadth of her determination. Feeling the reversal of the draft at her feet, she knew her target was now hers to command. The trailing end of the cloth about her head settling down to rest around the leku at her chest as it finished its involuntary pull forward. With her eyes shut tight to the realities about her, she saw within the Force the destination she had intended. She waved her hands toward the river of molten rock issuing forth to their right. Kawani was lost for words. She had seen marvels performed in the past, even recently from this very Togruta, but the magnitude of what transpired had taken her breath away. Her bike began inching toward Ahsoka, such as the intake of raw power. No, 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 she said to herself, as she fought that same energy to get behind it and prevent it from hitting Ahsoka. Then watched dumbfounded as the roiling heap of flaming and liquefying metal sluggishly dropped into the burning river in a new protest of brilliant bursts of white-hot explosions as it slowly slagged itself with gravity's assistance. The clamor began to subside to a deep resonance from within the ground as the last of the ship fought its inevitable end. Kawani was snapped out of the visual display by a sharp crack coming from the fortress walls. Ahsoka, we don't have much time, she said, looking up and trying to identify the source. I don't think this will hold up much longer. Ahsoka didn't even give it a thought. We've got all the time we need, Ani, she said, remembering Czar's impression. He would have built it to withstand a full-scale assault. Although she was in no hurry, this was not a desirable place to be. Let's go. Kawani left the bike behind and shuffled up to Ahsoka's side. She cast a glance down at her wristcom to acknowledge the received message and quickly tapped out a coded response. My concern isn't planet-based, Ahsoka. There is a blockade up there waiting for us. Well, it is planet-based as well, but that's my main concern, she said with a finger skyward. Ahsoka chuckled, surprising Kawani. Of course there is. This is what we were drawn here for, though, she said with her finger pointed toward the misshapen gateway. Spring the trap? Kawani asked sardonically. Spring the trap, Ahsoka affirmed. They both navigated the strewn stone and twisted debris from Ahsoka's cleanup without hesitation and stepped through the blasted gateway. No trappings nor decoration adorned the walls. They remained as impassive and polished as the exterior. Scattered stone from the ship's explosive entry crunched underfoot as the two moved moderately through the entry corridor. A crumpled form lay against the wall to their right. Ahsoka leaned down to see an emaciated man, his face pocked with stone and debris, an apparent victim of the explosion. From his side, she carefully rolled him over on his back, exposing deep craters in his chest, bones from his ribcage protruding at odd angles, and the entire visage of the horror struck across the parts of his face she could identify. Ahsoka carefully placed a hand over his head and drew back, closing the lifelessness that remained. She gathered what remained of his flowing black robe and covered his remains, blaster rifle at the ready. Kawani stood watchful over the right. The nondescript silence instantly transformed into an unnaturally strange quiet, oppressively dormant of any sound but the beating of their hearts, an occasional scuffle over loose debris at their feet. They only looked at each other, neither wishing to penetrate the soundless void. The corridor turned to the left just ahead, and a crimson light emanating from out of sight shone against the black of the walls leading to it. Point of no return, Ani. You don't need to come any further, Ahsoka whispered lightly. Kawani turned to Ahsoka, the shaded visor staring at the Togruta for only an instant before she shook her head, slammed a fresh power cell into the blaster rifle, and stepped forward. Ahsoka smiled inwardly, knowing it was precisely the reaction she had expected. They turned the corner to inspect the position and ascertain their surroundings. The corridor gave way to a large, high-domed chamber of the same polished black stone and exquisite, geometrically precise metal plating. A routed river of molten rock encircled a central platform, limbed with illuminated slots to vent the steam and smoke from the lava below. A black hooded form sat in its center, Kawani lining up a shot in less time than Ahsoka had, even distinguishing it from the flooring below it. Ahsoka raised her hand to the weapon's barrel and gently forced it down. Kawani, taking the clue, relaxed her form. I wondered how much longer I'd have to wait, said the form in a thick Mirialan accent, Kawani feeling an immediate tension. How many years has it been? But then you were never the patient sort, Barriss, Ahsoka said in return, no hint of sarcasm or condescension in her voice. The hooded head looked up. You did get my message then, she said, reaching both hands up to remove the cowl. This revealed a sallow mix of yellow and green mottled skin, her eyes pale yellow and her lips dull black. A slight arch of interlocking diamonds began and ended under each eye, crossing the bridge of her nose. Thana, Kawani thought, snapping the rifle back up and taking aim in the same motion for the center of the Mirialan's head. Loyalty? You sit here adorning the markings of loyalty? Kawani said through the modulated helmet, seething with anger. Ahsoka refrained from settling her this time. A light smile cracked across the black lips before them. I have remained ever loyal, my friend, loyal to the truth. Ahsoka felt her insides clench in anger at the words. You have no right calling anyone friend, Barriss. Barriss glanced at Ahsoka. My, how you've grown up, Ahsoka, ignoring the charged comment. Your vision of truth is still just as crooked as it was all those years ago. How can ignorance have such a tight grip on your senses? Ahsoka replied, ignoring Barris's comment. Barris stood up slowly, exposing nothing in the gesture as the robe covered her completely. Perhaps it is best to remove ourselves from pleasantries and get to the point. Good plan, Kawani said and pulled the trigger. The shot bullseyeing the target sizzling in the wall just over Barris's right shoulder. She doesn't have much patience for nonsense, Ahsoka said, nodding toward Kawani. Why are you here, and what do you want? I am here to escort you to Coruscant, Ahsoka, and I ask that you consider it peacefully, Barris said plainly, holding both hands outward, palms facing toward her audience. Ahsoka felt rage that had been dormant since Malachor. A host of witty retorts swirled within her mind, linking to her own emotions from past events, and links to her more recent visions, all of them underlined by a burning anger that begged for revenge. Ahsoka, Barris said gingerly, let go of your misgivings, your hate. They aren't the Jedi way, she said, reading Ahsoka's emotion, which again lacked condescension. I wish people would stop saying that, Ahsoka replied, sighing heavily. We have agreed on certain principles in the past, Barris, but the principle only equals thought. What we do beyond those abstract notions defines our credibility, she added with a sigh, feeling the anger subside somewhat. I have never known you to possess such a strong attachment to your feelings, specifically those of anger, Ahsoka. However, your friend here seems to bathe in them, Barris returned. Kawani inwardly agreed. For good reason, you traitorous. Let's just keep a cool head, Ahsoka said, cutting her off. I disagree, Ahsoka. I want to know what motivates my compatriot, Barris interjected. Kawani had longed for an opportunity like this. My motivation, as well as that of thousands more, begins and ends with Kino. If you are here on behalf of anyone on Coruscant, you know what I am talking about. Atrocities, she said, her words filled with malice. Of which I took no part in, Barris said, giving Kawani her full attention. She laughed in return. Complicity is still guilt, compatriot, she said, almost spitting the words. Ahsoka shook her head, tuning out the verbal exchange. Stop. Barris, you already know we're not going with you. That fact will remain despite this bickering, she said in a measured tone. All her dreams and visions of the past rushed to the forefront of her thoughts, beginning with her dismissal from the judicial courtroom all those years ago, a moment in time that irrevocably set her on her path. The look of pain, hurt, and regret upon Barris's face at that time was still beneath the facade she now presented. She trained the most heartfelt expression she could muster on Barris. There is only one reason I am here, Barris, she began, exhaling deeply. I forgive you. And with those words, a tremendous burden seemingly lifted from her very soul, and a newfound freedom emanated. She felt transcended, but knew she wasn't done. And, she paused briefly, I apologize for the part I played. I should have given your misgivings more attention and thought. We could have provided a stronger voice to make our point heard. I wasn't there for you when you needed me the most, and for that I am sincerely sorry, Barris. She finished, feeling a calm washing over her that only honesty could provide. Ahsoka, for the first time in years, felt whole again. She knew she was smiling and how that smile may be perceived, but it was genuine, and she did not intend to hide it. She reached down at her side and removed the black cylinder from the clip at her waist. She held it in her palm for a few seconds, then dropped it to the ground with a thud and resonating clatter, the crystal song from within no longer audible. The silence in its absence comforted her, and she knew she no longer needed a physical extension to retain her balance. That balance was now internal. She half turned to Kawani, feeling her friend's tension building. Ani, let it go. She is right, Kawani Amat, Tsar said, resonating within her. Can you not feel the force around you, Kawani? It is at peace. His words hung in her subconscious until the proximity chime from the threat assessment software within the helmet warned her of incoming targets, 3 to be exact. This is a setup, Tsar. I see the currents at the feet of the traitor. The Force claims her as it claims a street merchant or Veermok. She is no more in tune with it than the rock outside. No, Tsar, the force is not at peace. It is being manipulated to appear calm on the surface. But look deeper. It is a tempest. Kawani answered inwardly. No, she said aloud and fired the prime blast straight into the forehead of Barris, cratering her skull as the shot echoed through the chamber. What are you doing? Ahsoka screamed, adding her echo to the din, making a motion to rush to the side of Barris's sagging form. Ask the woman behind us, Kawani replied casually, catching Ahsoka off guard, or the ones coming toward us from either side. Ahsoka turned to give Kawani a bewildered look, only then identifying a cloaked form entering the chamber like they had. A chortled laugh, mottled with hints of hysteria emanating from within the folds of the cloth. Ever the peacemaker, Ahsoka. The voice is mirroring that of the deceased form before they said, Your adept is right to question the merit of my words. Ahsoka turned to face the newcomer, Kawani taking a position behind her to confront the speechless forms materializing out of the darkness at their sides. Your words? Ahsoka asked slowly, her mind trying to contemplate what was happening. She turned her gaze to the fallen woman and then back to the approaching form, letting the instants play out and doing her best to make sense of the events. Her stomach lurched as a conclusion began to dawn on her. Barris. The form before them bore the same olive hands and arms as they escaped the sleeves of the extravagant robe she adorned. She moved to remove the cowl over her head, revealing an identical face. Kawani made a motion to sling the blaster rifle over her head and shoulder and let it fall at her back as she drew twin Westar 35s and held them with arms outstretched to the advancing forms from either side. I stand corrected on my earlier assessment of this particular situation, Kawani. Adding to your perspective, what do you see? Zar asked. She quickly motioned to either side of her, inspecting the similar force currents emanating or drawn into the forms to her left and right. They are unchanged, she thought in reply. She is different, she uttered for all to hear, referring to the clone ahead of Ahsoka. Am I, though? Asked the non-cowled version. Seeing isn't necessarily believing, is it? Phrased as a statement rather than a question, the fact resonated within Kawani, and she primed each holdout with a flick of both of her right thumb and left index finger, which whined audibly, adding to the tension present. Having distinguished at least a portion of her present reality for what it was, Ahsoka couldn't shake the lingering question within her. Why? The Barris before her split her lips in a crooked smile. Ahsoka, everything that has been done was for a singular purpose. As much as I deeply appreciate your apology, you did your part exceptionally well and have advanced the agenda beyond the Emperor's ability to perceive. Ahsoka looked even more confused. By the stars, Barris, I don't have the patience for these cryptic ramblings. Anything that I have done was by my choice alone. There is no intertwined destiny, and most certainly not that of a lunatic demagogue. Kawani wasn't sure if Ahsoka was attempting to provoke anger or manipulating the situation to leech more information from the Barris, which she saw as real. She could not, however, understand why Ahsoka hadn't been aware of the approaching forms until she mentioned them. Deciding to gauge the conversation instead of adding, she said, That's far enough, both of you. She knew the targeting information the HUD inside the helmet fed her. Red flashing squares outlined the precise center of both chests, complete with probability indicators over them, both reading with 3 digits. All she had to do was fire. Out of respect for you, I will indulge your curiosity, but only this. Preparation is the bedrock of strategy, Ahsoka, Barris said slowly, and in the compassionate voice Ahsoka remembered from the former Padawan. Ahsoka's bewilderment achieved new levels of incomprehension. She wasn't sure if Barris had avoided cloaking her words or if she was being manipulated in other ways. My sisters and I are but many in the chain that will secure this galaxy for millennia, Barris added, fueled by the quizzical look Ahsoka had adopted. Kawani was becoming impatient as her wristcom chimed away while she held the 2 other forms, which she learned were more of the first at bay. I have to get that link to the helmet, she thought. A wise endeavor, Tsar said. This conversation is provoking memory, Kawani. Zar added, supplanting her focus momentarily. I cannot place it appropriately, but an agenda is relevant here, one which has been evolving for hundreds of years. Although entranced by the idea of fitting into some cosmic scheme, Kawani adhered to her nature and remained focused on the two targets, ready to act. They are expendable in that undertaking and understand their role, Barris said, giving Ahsoka just a fraction more to complicate as she nodded toward the other forms. The notion struck Ahsoka, the callous notion contradicting her belief. You dare mock those that stood and fought at your side, died so that you may live. Those who only wanted to be considered individual in a tide of identical faces. She began giving a metered volley of the anger roiling within her, as the thoughts of Rex and Cody came to mind, as did all those that followed. Kawani could feel the same energies drawing themselves into Ahsoka, which was outside, and she planted her feet to stand her ground behind the Togruta. Zar, this is bigger than before, she thought. Much bigger. Keep your focus on the others. I will do what I can to form a buffer. Keep your stance wide. Zar added to the befuddlement of Kawani. Barris only laughed. They knew their place, Ahsoka, as do my sisters. As will yours, she added sardonically with a brief wink at Ahsoka. Ahsoka had reached her breaking point within the rhetoric at that last remark and began laughing, an unnatural laugh that took everyone off guard for a moment, including Kawani. Oh, Barris, she paused briefly. I don't think so, and she snapped her form in the blink of an eye to a low crouch and outstretched her hands. Kawani instinctively directed the blasters over Ahsoka's shoulders, both trained on the Barris before them. The targeting reticles, rushing to keep pace with the action, floated in her view for a few seconds before finding identical spots to rest right at the conjunction of the shoulders and breastbone. The shots would not kill, but they would incapacitate. The Barris before them adopted a similar counter-defensive stance and motioned with her arms to either side of her waist. And what do you propose to do about the inevitable, Ahsoka? She said, adding venom to the cruel vibrancy of her voice. If not me, then someone, Ahsoka. You cannot run forever. Ahsoka flashed a brief smile, neither telling nor condescending. I have no intention of running, Barris. Those days are over, she said with authority, giving Kawani had yet to glean from her friend at any point earlier, giving way to an organic comprehension that Zar seemed to realize as well. She has let go. Kawani, did you feel it? Zar spoke what they were both thinking. She smiled within the helmet, understanding Ahsoka's driving need for balance, and even her dropping the hilt to the ground. She's found it for certain, Zar, Kawani said. A comforting feeling washed over her in that instant, of contentment or the discovery of a long-sought peace within. She knew Ahsoka was the center of something extraordinary, and although she didn't know what form that would take, it didn't matter. What did was the Togruta, the bond they had formed, and all the intangibles that go along with it. This was the peace she had involuntarily sought. The two clones of Barris at either side removed the cowls from their robes and began reaching down at their sides. Every participant in the exchange could feel the palpable tension evolving between Ahsoka and Barris, and each ran through scenarios subconsciously of their respective roles to play within it. Kawani could sense a hard-fought turning point was on the precipice of time itself, but also that her role lay in not getting in Ahsoka's way, such as the situation was transpiring. She idled her front side closer to Ahsoka's back to come within contact, so she could read the cue she knew was coming. The Barris clones seemed to think and move as one organic unit, identical in expression and subtle movements, and would not survive this exchange in Kawani's estimation. Zara found it frustrating to understand the situation, as Kawani was thinking it and not sounding off his position to keep her free from distraction. Kawani knelt slightly to place her abdomen directly in contact with Ahsoka's shoulder blades, then waited for the anticipated tension to build within the muscles, knowing Ahsoka would employ a very brief exhale and reflexive motion before she made her move. She could feel the even and measured breaths Ahsoka was now taking, that moment before all hell broke loose when time stood still. Active imagination fabricated a multitude of scenarios and probable outcomes. She felt the breaths deepen, her own following the same battle-worn rhythm. Time froze utterly, and as Kawani felt the extremely short exhale she knew was coming, and fired both blasters without hesitation, the bolts seeming to travel in an eerie slow motion as they charged the air around them, heading directly for each target. Ahsoka unleashed the full fury of the Force energy she had been accumulating and squeezed both hands in respective fists, turning the left fist slightly and jerking suddenly downward. Kawani realizing Ahsoka's target as she spun both blasters in unison to the Barris clone to the left. Kawani watched in real time as the head turned to an impossible angle, then bent back completely before slamming forward ferociously into the duranium floor with a stomach-churning crunch. Understanding what had happened, she then spun to the Barris to the right, who was in her own death throes and clutching ineffectively at her neck. Ahsoka snapped her left hand down to retrieve her lightsaber before the first of the clones had fallen, and was already eyeing Barris when she felt Kawani's blaster bolts finish the second. Kawani spun back toward Barris and crouched below the emerging form of Ahsoka as she made to stand, her lightsaber ignited and in hand. She took that precious second to ascertain that both of her initial blasts had missed completely, but bought Ahsoka the time she needed to strengthen their odds. Time sped back up again to a more natural pace when Kawani finally tapped her wristcom, this time not bothering with encrypting anything. She tapped it once and said, "Go for extraction, Adali." Please consider a like and sub. It is YouTube's way of getting these to more people. I am less concerned with subs as I am with getting the story out there, and I need your help to do that. Thank you.